Recording in progress.
Yeah.
Everyone, my name is Mike Mueller-Smith. Thanks for coming to this pop studies roundup. This week, we're really excited to have Basit Zafar, my colleague from the economics department at University of Michigan, with us to talk about the silent treatment imperfect correlation of spousal expectations and communication friction. Basit is a fantastic colleague. If you haven't met him before, I highly encourage you to reach out to him. He is just such a great mentor and generally all-around smart person. He works on a range of topics in labor economics, economics of education, and outside finance. He would like to take questions as we go, and we're going to have him present for about 15 minutes. So please just jump in with your questions. There isn't going to be a dedicated portion of the questions at the end. With that, Basit, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the introduction. I'm going to jump in, especially people who, if there are people on Zoom, I wouldn't be able to see them. They should also just jump in as questions come, and so should people in the room. So thanks for having me to present this. I'm going to present something which is somewhat preliminary. Like the data has already been collected, so we can't change that. But like the analysis, if you have comments and suggestions on that, I think we'd be very open to that. And we do plan to run another wave, survey wave. So if you have some questions that we can't answer with the current data, please reach out, or please bring them up during the seminar or reach out to me after the seminar. So here in this particular project, what we're really interested in is how information gets communicated within couples. And this is joint work with Adeline Delavande and Gizem Kosar, and you can read the disclaimer at the bottom. I'm going to move on. Okay, so if you think about it, many decisions are made at the household level, right? So if you're thinking about how much a household decides to save, how much labor they decide to supply, when they're going to retire, and so on, what matters are not only my own expectations of my earnings process, my future, my post-retirement income, and so on, but also what I think is going to be happening with my spouse. And this is something like, in economics, there's a whole literature where people have tried to model decision-making within the household. This literature has started out initially from unitary models, and then it's moved to what we call collective models. And in these models, both the preferences as well as the expectations of both spouses matter for the decision making, right? So let's think about the particular application here is going to be when people decide to retire, or their expectations about their social security benefits. What matters are my preferences for my own labor supply, but also what my spouse's preferences are, and my expectations about my earnings process and my future benefits, as well as those of my spouses. And what historically, I'm not going to be able to move from here because the mic is here. So historically, like the typical assumption that is made in all these models is this idea that couples have similar expectations and there are no information frictions. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good quote, I think, that summarizes where the literature is. And I'll just read it. It says, we assume complete information in the sense that household members have full knowledge of preferences and probability distributions over the variables of interest. Okay, so that's the working assumption in all these models. And I think it's partly because it's partly made out of convenience. And so that's going to be the starting point here. What we do know, because there is an entire literature where people have collected data on subjective expectations, we do know that these subjective expectations tend to be very predictive of individual decision-making. And we also know that there's a lot of evidence that individuals don't have full information, and they tend to be responsive to information provision. So there's a whole literature on that. But where there is less evidence is we don't know that much about how expectations for the same economic variables look like within a couple, and to what extent information gets shared within couples. Okay, so that's where we're going to come in. And what we do is, as part of this project and research agenda that we have, is we create an online panel of spouses. And the first thing that we want to do here is we want to test this assumption: to what extent individuals within the same couple have similar expectations about the same economic variables. It's going to turn out that the correlation is going to be pretty far from one. So, and that should not be surprising to anyone, I think, in this room, because just because we make those assumptions in our models doesn't necessarily mean that they're correct. But I think we can show you, because it's just been very hard to collect data on expectations of the same variable from within a couple. We can show you that we can reject the equality of expectations within couples. And then what we're going to be interested in is we're going to do a sequential information experiment within couples. And we're going to be interested in how if I treat one spouse, whether some of that information makes it to their partner or not, and what explains that heterogeneity, okay? And then, of course, at the end of the day, we care about these expectations because they feed into actual decision making. So what we're also then interested in is, as a result of information provision either to one spouse or both spouses, to what extent do beliefs and expected plans become more aligned within a household. That's the part. The last part is not something that I believe I will be able to get to because it's a shorter presentation today, but I will be talking a lot about the first two parts today, okay? So where we're going to be doing this is going to be in the context of Social Security expectations in the US. So Social Security benefits, I think most people in this room already know, is a pretty important source of retirement income for many households. So at least about half of 65 plus households receive at least 50% of their income from Social Security benefits, and at least a quarter rely on it. It's about 90% of their income. So Social Security benefits are a large part of a subpopulation out there. It's a large part of their post-retirement income. And of course, there is a large literature, and HRS, which is House Share, has been collecting a lot of these data. So there is a large literature, primarily from individuals, where people have shown that expectations about these benefits do play a role in individuals' decisions of when they're going to retire. And the decisions. So what we're going to argue here is we're going to move one step further forward, and we're going to collect data on these expectations from both couples, from both individuals in a couple. Okay. So let me tell you what we're going to find, and then I'm going to go into the details of how we do that. So let me be more specific. So one example, what we're going to do is we're going to ask individuals, okay, what do you think your benefits are going to be, your Social Security benefits, if you retire, if you claim at age 67, right, which is the standard claiming age right now. And then we're going to also ask your partner what they think your benefits are going to be. Okay, so those are the expectations that we're interested in. And similarly, we ask you about what you think your partner's benefits are going to be, and then we ask your partner what they think their benefits are going to be. So that correlation within couples is going to vary between 0.5 and 0.7. In a world where, like, if there were no measurement error, there were no information frictions, there was full information, this correlation should be 1, right? What we're going to see in the data, this correlation is going to be between 0.5 and 0.7. Okay. Now, there are many reasons why this correlation could differ from 1. One that like with any standard survey data you might think about is measurement error, right? So, and I'm going to show you that it's unlikely that all of this is entirely due to measurement error. Of course, measurement error is going to be playing some role in the background, but we don't think this is all entirely because of measurement error. And I'm going to show you some patterns in the data, which are primarily descriptive, where I'm going to show you that this correlation does differ by some characteristics of the couple. So one example, for example, is we have measures of the quality of the marital relationship. So in couples where the two individuals disagree about the quality of the marital relationship, which I think is a pretty good proxy for something that is dysfunctional about that relationship, you're going to see that correlation is going to be much lower. Okay, so that's going to be suggestive of some frictions. So there could be communication frictions. There could also be cognitive frictions. Okay, then what we're going to do is, when we put together this panel of spouses, the way we do this is we survey these spouses sequentially. Okay, so we're going to call the first spouse the index spouse, and then there's a secondary spouse. A subset of index spouses are going to be given information about their own Social Security benefits, as well as the Social Security benefits of their partners, okay? And we're going to use this variation where there's this sequential design of the survey where the second spouse is surveyed with a delay of about 2 weeks. And the fact that we randomly provide information to a subset of index spouses, we're going to use that to see whether information spills over to the secondary spouses whose index spouse was treated, okay? And I'm going to show you that there is going to be a fair amount of spillovers in this particular context. And there's going to be also quite a bit of heterogeneity, which is ex ante quite sensible, right? So you might think, for example, in couples where the first spouse, for example, is more financially savvy or has higher cognitive ability, arguably they are better able to comprehend that information and able to communicate it to the second partner. For example, we are going to find evidence of that, for example. And similarly, the point that I mentioned earlier, this measure of marital quality is going to be predictive of how large the spillovers are going to be. Okay. We're not going to find any evidence, and maybe it feels somewhat vague at this point, but once I get there, I'll show you that we're not going to find any evidence of strategic motivations where partners are hiding some kind of information and are more likely to save other kinds of information. Okay. And the last bullet point is something that I won't talk about today, because, from a policy perspective, you might wonder, is it enough to just treat one spouse, right? So as I just said, there are spillovers to the second spouse. So once you treat the first spouse, some of that information does make its way to the second partner, but that by itself is not enough. You still need to give information to the second spouse. That still leads to more alignment in expectations and intended behaviors within couples. Okay, so that's yes.
I've got a question. So, I could be wrong. I thought that on a lot of DHS surveys, they'll ask expected total fertility.
Yeah.
Have you guys done the exercise of comparing what the correlation on this kind of financial domain is like?
Yeah.
Versus family planning.
Right. So no, so we haven't done that. So DHS, you're absolutely right that they ask typically how many children would you want to have, which is different. They're not asking you how many. I mean, I don't want to say DHS does not do that. Maybe some researchers have done this where they ask you, how many do you think your partner wants to have and how many do you want to have? But DHS typically asks what is the ideal number of children? And that's pretty well documented that there's some difference. Here, I'm not going to, we are going to also elicit expectations of a bunch of other variables. And I'm going to show you that this correlation that we're getting 0.5 to 0.7 is not something which is only specific to Social Security benefits. Even when we ask, for example, couples about their household income expectations, the correlation is going to be in a similar range. So it's not only specific to Social Security benefits. Okay. Yeah.
Could you clarify what you mean by measurement error? Are you including in there uncertainty, genuine uncertainty about the data?
No. So that's a good point. So that could be a form of measurement error, but let me be more specific. Let's say I'm told that my Social Security benefits are $1,250. And then when I report it to my partner, I just round it, for example.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about standard survey measurement error. What you just mentioned is let's say I'm given some information and then I update my priors about my benefits and I give a point estimate and there's some uncertainty around it. That's not what we put in measurement error. Though we do have those data as well. So we do have information about how certain the index spouse is, about their future expected benefits once we give them information. I took that slide out last night, so I want that.
Just that, naturally, if both spouses are guessing to some degree, then you could also get a correlation less than one.
Exactly.
Well, that could be another reason.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'll talk a lot more about this because you might think, okay, we're asking 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds, which were 20 years away from retirement, or I think many people in this room, for example, so Social Security benefits are only going to be a small part of their post-retirement income, right? So there is good reason for them not to have well-formed expectations. And once I get to the heterogeneity, I'll show you that even in subsamples, where arguably it's a relatively high stake outcome, even there this correlation is going to be pretty low.
Yeah.
But I'll talk a lot more about this. But that's what I meant by measurement error.
Okay.
Standard survey measurement error. Yeah. Okay. Was there any other questions somewhere? Okay. So let me just jump in. In the interest of time, there is actually some pretty interesting work, primarily in developing countries, where they look at communication frictions within couples in the context of fertility, in the context of migration. And in recent years, there are some interesting papers where they look at how information spills over within couples. The Conlon et al. Paper is a pretty stylized setting where they're asking people to draw balls from an urn and look at how people update when they receive the information themselves or when the information comes from their partner. But my point is, there is very limited evidence in especially high-income countries in terms of our understanding of how information gets shared within couples. And especially that's true when you think about first order economic variables in there. That's not draws from an urn, which is interesting to understand how people update expectations. But when you think about how people are forming expectations about first order economic variables is very little work. And this is partly because it's a data limitation issue. I can tell you when we put together this panel of spouses, it's taken us over 2 years. Yeah, okay. I don't think I need to talk much about Social Security in the US to people in this room. I think the standard, for people who were born after 1960, the standard claiming age is 67. You can claim as early as 62. There is a penalty, and you can delay the claiming age till 70, and then and those benefits are adjusted. We're not going to take any stand here about what the optimal age of claiming is for a given individual. That's going to depend on a bunch of different factors. Some we observe and some we don't observe. Okay. So this sample comes from, for those of you who might be aware, the New York Fed runs a survey of consumer expectations, which is a rotating panel of household heads in the US. When people rotate out of that panel, they are asked whether they are willing to be contacted for future surveys and whether they're willing to refer their partners for these future surveys. So that's primarily where we're drawing this sample from. Okay, so we're going to have a sample of 2,200 couples, and the index spouse, I'm going to be using index spouse to refer to the first partner. They're going to be between the ages of 38 and 62. Okay, and then once the index spouse completes the survey, then their partner gets a survey invitation within a week or two, and basically we have the case where about 20% of secondary spouses are completing the survey. Okay, so we have 22,000 couples, but there are almost like 10,000 index spouses who took the survey. Okay, selection, we don't really see much evidence in terms of the observables. We pay these people quite a bit in order to complete these surveys, where if both of them complete the survey, then there's a bonus at the couple level. And we collected, what I'm going to talk about today is looking at their expectations about what their own benefits are, Social Security benefits are going to be, and their partner's Social Security benefits, and their expectations about claiming age, okay, as well as retirement age. And we have standard stuff on demographics, household wealth, and so on. Okay, so let me move here. So what I have here is I'm just showing you what the sample looks like. So about 60% of the index spouses are females. The sample, about 88% is white. About half of our sample is going to be below the age of 45. This is a pretty high educated sample. About 60% of the sample has a college degree. I think this is partly an artifact that this is an online survey. So typically, you get high response rates from college graduates. We have some measures of marital satisfaction, and I think because this is something that I will be talking about, I do want to show you these questions. So basically, we have we use this battery of questions, which is supposed to measure couple satisfaction, and you can see the 4 questions here. So, for example, it asks the degree of happiness, all things considered, of your relationship with your spouse. Okay, so all of these questions are on a Likert scale. This is a battery of questions that we just took from the literature, and this is what we're going to be using in order to measure marital satisfaction. And just one. Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
I guess this might be since you brought up marital satisfaction, you know, it might be a good time to ask about potential strategic behavior. I guess you highlighted at the beginning that you don't think strategic stuff is going on, but in a lot of the related literature, like in particular the migrant context, or like, you know, the spouses are separated and there might be incentives to misreport your income because you want to, you know, on the migrant side, you might want to misreport your income to your spouse, so you're getting less pressure to share remittances. That's very prominent. So I guess I'm just wondering in this context, what kind of strategic considerations might we think about?
Let me defer this question. So I think when I refer to strategic motivations, that was what kind of, so let's say you're in the survey, you report your Social Security benefits, and you're told, oh, your benefits are actually much higher than what you actually thought, right? So, or much lower. that's the kind of strategic motivation that we have in mind, that there might be some motivation to share certain kinds of information more than others. But the thing that you were referring to, which I know in especially developing countries, where there are strategic motivations for sharing income.
Yeah.
Here in this particular context, people have a pretty good sense of what their partner's income is.
Yeah, Social Security benefits are future.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about their current income.
Yeah.
But I'll defer this once we get to the part, and you might have some other ways in terms of like why there might be some strategic motivations. Once I get there, you can tell me whether that, I'm only going to talk about it in one specific way. Thank you.
Because there's not a lot of selection on observables, is there really no selectivity into the paired sample on marital satisfaction?
Oh, so okay, let me go back. No, for marital, yeah, so we don't have anything happening in terms of marital satisfaction. We checked this thing. So we have marital satisfaction from the index spouse. So you're worried that, okay, that like some couples where like, people are more or less satisfied, maybe their secondary spouse is more or less likely to. We don't find evidence of that here.
Why not, right?
I mean, sure, but like you can also argue that maybe this is something about the measure. Maybe it's not capturing, there's noise in that measure also. But at least it's not, I mean, just because it's no stars on it, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. But
It could be highly correlated with one or the other.
it could be, like you can see the kind of selection that you're having here, like people who are high numeracy, for example, are much more likely, their partners are much more likely to take the survey. One thing that you might worry about is, and this is something we thought about, is, if you were in the treatment group, right, if you got it, index spouse got information, their partners are slightly more likely to answer, which is not unexpected, right? You would expect that. Because as I said, like 25% of these secondary spouses end up answering. So that increases by about 3 percentage points. Doesn't seem like very large, but it is there. Okay. So I was talking about marital satisfaction. So we've normalized this, but on the left-hand side, I'm showing you that there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of how people are answering these questions. It's normalized to zero, to mean 0 and standard deviation 1. For each of those questions. And then on the right-hand side, I'm showing you, because this is a measure that we're going to be using, is how much the two couples disagree in terms of how they answer the question, right? So you can have like couples where both are equally happy or both are equally unhappy, but then one is saying, okay, I'm really happy, and the other is saying, I'm not happy, right? So at all. So there's a fair amount of heterogeneity. Like a lot of people, about 2/3 of the couples, how they're answering this question is pretty much aligned, but then there is a third of couples where they disagree in how they answer this question. And this is something that we're going to explore once we get to the breaks. Okay, so just very quickly, how are we asking these questions? And I'm only going to talk about age 67 benefits. So we asked them, if you were to retire, and I'll just read this out, at age 67 and collect benefits, on average, how much do you expect the monthly payments to be in today's dollars? Okay, so this is their expectation about their own benefits. And you were asking about uncertainty. We also asked them about their point estimate uncertainty, the way people do in this literature, right? So this was a person who said that they thought their benefits were going to be $3,500. Then we asked them to put probabilities in each of these bins. Okay, I'm not going to talk about. I took out those slides as I mentioned. Okay, so then we asked them. On the previous slide, we asked them about themselves, and then we asked them, okay, if your spouse were to retire at age 67 and collect benefits, on average, how much do you expect your spouse's benefits to be in today's dollars? Okay, and then we're doing the same set of questions to the secondary spouse when we get there. Okay, so let me show you what's going on here. So on average, people expect that their benefits are going to be about $2,260. What I'm calling here, and maybe you don't like this language, is based on the Social Security calculator and what they tell us about their earnings and how long they worked and so on, we can approximate what their benefits are going to be. Okay, so this is saying that if there are like roughly an equal number of people who are overestimating their benefits and people who are underestimating their benefits. Okay, relative, if you believe that number is correct. Okay, and that number is going to be based on what people are inputting in the survey. And similarly, they expect that their spouse's benefits are going to be around the same number. The actual, given what people tell us in our sample, the actual benefits of this sample is about, on average, $2,000. Yes.
Well, so if you took your calculator and used it in the context, say, of HRFs where you have complete earnings.
Yeah,
And then you just fed the little bit, whatever you elicited from your respondents. You compared what the calculator gave based on the limited information in your sample
yeah.
to the presumably correct, it would be.
We haven't done that. That's a good point. So what I should be, I don't know where I put that. Okay, what we do right now is, I totally get your question. I don't know the answer to that. I've taken a note down. The calculator that we use in our survey is based on what the Social Security Administration calls the easy calculator. And we're actually just using the same formula and that makes a lot of assumptions because we're not collecting that much information from these people. But your question is how good an approximation that is, and I don't know the answer to that, but we can do that exercise. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do is there are some variables that we're going to be interested in here. The absolute gap is basically how much the calculator predicts your benefits are going to be and what you said your benefits are. Okay, so what this is saying is that the absolute error, I'm going to use the term errors. They don't necessarily mean errors for the reasons that we've already talked about in this room. So on average, like the gap between the absolute gap between what I think my benefits are going to be and what they actually are about $1,200. Okay, these are pretty sizable gaps. And then this number here, the last number here, is telling you what is the absolute gap between what I think my benefits are going to be and what my spouse thinks my benefits are going to be. Okay, that absolute gap is about $800. Yes.
Do you ask about the spouse's current earnings?
Yes. Yeah. That's how we get the benefit. Yeah. So this was the question that I was saying. I was telling Dean that surprisingly actually people have a pretty good sense of what their spouses are, because you might think that part of this $800 is because the spouses are misinformed about what their partner makes. And the answer that's a very small part of this. Okay. Okay. So this is basically now looking at like what spouse A thinks that their own benefits are going to be, and what spouse B thinks that spouse A's benefits are going to be. Okay. So you can see here, like it's centered around zero, but there's a lot of heterogeneity here. Like there are some people who are overestimating their spouse's benefits by $1,000, and others who are underestimating them by $1,000. Okay, so it's centered around zero, but sizable mismatch or whatever you want to call this. So basically, about half of the couples in the sample have an absolute distance of more than $200. Okay, and as I said, like the average benefits in the sample are about predicted benefits are about $1,900. Okay, so this is the first the result that I want to show you here is. This is just doing a bin scatter, looking at the correlation between what spouse A thinks that their own benefits are going to be, and this is what spouse B thinks spouse A's benefits are going to be. Okay, so this was the correlation that I showed earlier in the presentation. This is about 0.7. Okay, and there could be many reasons why this should differ from even without any frictions, this could differ from one. So at this point, this correlation is about 0.7. So the first thing that I want to talk about a little bit is measurement error. Like how much measurement error would you have to have in the data in order to get this correlation? Okay, so the way we do this, there are a bunch of different ways of doing this. So we're going to assume that when individuals report their beliefs, they report them with some error, where its classical measurement error means zero, and there's some variance of that error term. Okay, so the question is how much error would there have to be in order to get this correlation of about 0.7, and the answer is that this sigma would have to be about $730, which means that the noise to signal ratio would have to be about a third. Okay, so that's a sizable amount of measurement error that you would need in the data in order to get this kind of correlation. What I can also tell you, because remember we have a control group, at this point I haven't mentioned this, but in the index spouses, we have a control group where they're not being given any new information in the survey, and we ask them the same thing again in the survey. Okay, so for the control group, this retest ratio, correlation is about 0.9, which is actually pretty high. Okay, so that by itself, that can tell you, okay, how much of measurement error would that give you? That's about a sigma of about $350. So the point that I want to make here is that the measurement error in the treatment group would have to be almost twice that in order to give you this correlation. Okay, which suggests that it's unlikely that all of this low correlation is entirely driven by measurement error. Okay, so next what I'm going to show you is I'm going to cut the data by different characteristics of the household in order to see whether this correlation systematically differs or not. So as I mentioned earlier, individuals are pretty young, relatively young in the sample. You would think, okay, maybe they haven't thought that much about these expectations, and in older couples, they should have a much stronger correlation, right? That's not what you see here. In the second one, what I'm showing you here is arguably for people in our sample who are below median earnings, for them, Social Security earnings are going to be a large part of their post-retirement wealth. So you would think that, okay, maybe they are the couples who have thought more about this, and for them the correlation should be higher. That's not the case, but I want to be careful. These are just descriptive cuts. Couples which are below median earnings are also going to be different along a lot of other dimensions, right? So you want to be a little careful here. The other thing it is actually related to the question that Dean had asked is like, you might think that, okay, in couples, because we also elicit the uncertainty, right? So you might think in couples where they're pretty certain about what they think their benefits are going to be, the correlation should be much higher, and again, you don't really see much evidence of that. Okay.
How do you think the respondents are thinking about mortality risk in this context of surviving to 65?
Yeah, so we asked them about mortality risk, but when we asked them this question, the question is, if you claim at age 67, what your benefits are going to be. This is not unconditional. This is conditional on claiming. Yeah. I think what you have, the mortality risk would, etc., that would matter in terms of claiming age and things like that. Right. Okay. Where you do see some heterogeneity here is when you start cutting the data by measures of marital relationship quality. Okay. Which so what I'm showing you here is if both spouses report pretty high levels of satisfaction, the correlation is much higher. Okay. And to us, this suggests that these questions on marital satisfaction are capturing, of course, the quality of the relationship, but that's also a proxy in some ways of the kinds of communication frictions within the couple. This was the result that as I was mentioning earlier. So this is where below median marital satisfaction difference are couples where they disagree less about how they answer that question. So they answer the question similarly. And you can think of these couples where they're answering this question differently, which suggests that there's something off with the relationship, okay? So there you do see, again, these correlations are not markedly different, but you do see that these correlations do differ along the lines that you might expect them to differ, okay? Okay, so there was a question that was asked earlier, whether this is something about Social Security benefits. So in the survey, we actually asked a lot of different expectations. So for me, the one, for example, households should have a pretty, like when we ask people about, what do you think your household income is going to be a year from now? This is that expectation. And this is the correlation within couples for this expectation. So the correlation that I showed you earlier are not only specific to Social Security benefits, even when you ask people about some variables where you would arguably think that households should have a better sense, the correlations are in the same range, yes.
Have you looked at how accurate couples' expectations for benefits are, if that's related?
Yeah, so actually that's coming up. So I'll get to that in one slide. Okay. So what I'm showing you, this is going to this question of accuracy. So what this is showing is the gap in own benefits, the percentage gap, which is what the calculator says my benefits are going to be, what I said my benefits are. So what this is saying is on average individuals, if we just look on the left-hand side, the mean gap, perception gap is about -8%, which basically means that individuals on average are overestimating their benefits by about 8% relative to this calculator prediction, okay? But again, you can see there's a lot of heterogeneity here in the kinds of errors that individuals are making. And similarly on the right-hand side. Now the question that was asked is like, when we started this project, one of the things that you sometimes hear is, okay, maybe couples specialize, right? So one partner is making decisions and they're really well informed, and the other one, they're not making decisions, so that's why they're not acquiring information, because they don't need to acquire information. It's rational inattention. What I'm showing you here is, I'm just showing you I bin the data by the deciles of the error that people are making, spouse A and spouse B, okay? And what you can see here, there's a lot of mass along the diagonal. What this is saying is that errors are highly positively correlated within couples. So if one partner overestimates benefits, the other one is also doing so. Okay, or vice versa. One is underestimating, the other one is also underestimating their benefits, which is not consistent with this story of specialization at all. Okay. Yes.
Is it a heterogeneity across gender of the spouses?
In the errors, I think
More in general, but also in the errors.
I don't remember there being, let me see if I have something. Yeah, there's nothing that comes up by gender. I don't remember, yeah. And this is going to matter a lot when we get to spillovers also. Because we're not going to find systematically different spillovers depending on the gender of the spouse. Okay, so far I've shown you some descriptive evidence, and at least our takeaway from this descriptive evidence is that at least some of it seems to be consistent with some kind of frictions, whether they are communication frictions or cognitive frictions within couples. So now I'm going to try to get at this more causally, and there we're going to do an information experiment with couples. So I apologize, this slide has a lot of information on it. So about a quarter of our index spouses are not going to get any information. Okay, so they're going to be control spouses. And the remaining are going to get information, and the way this is set up is at the baseline people report expectations, then they get information about their own benefits, they report their expectations, then they get information about their own benefits plus their spouse's benefits. And they re-report their expectations, okay? That's the design for the index spouse. And then when we go to the control spouse, so these are control spouses who didn't get any social security related information, they had a placebo treatment. We go to their partners, it's the same design. They report their expectations, they have a placebo treatment, and they re-report their expectations, okay? Here, in the index spouses who were treated, we're going to cut the sample by half. I'm not going to talk about that on today. They report their expectations. So remember, their partners received information, right? So there's a possibility of spillovers here when people report their baseline expectation. So in fact, when we're going to be looking at spillovers, we're going to be comparing this group here with this group here. Okay, that's going to tell us spillovers. And then we tell them about their own benefits and their partner's benefits. We re-list their expectations. So that's going to be the design here, okay? So this is what the information treatment looks like, where we're giving them information about their spouse as well as their own benefits. So we say, okay, based on the formula which is used by the Social Security Quick Calculator, so individuals could click on this and a new window would open up. And we're using the same formula, which of course makes assumptions. It makes assumptions about the growth of earnings and so on going forward. So we tell them based on this calculator and the earnings that you reported for your spouse, these are the benefits for your spouse, okay, if they were to claim at each of these ages. And similarly, based on their own benefits, what they told us, what their own benefits are going to be, okay? So that's basically a snapshot of and the way this is done in the survey is initially we only show them their own information. And then later on, we show them information about their spouse and themselves both. Okay? That's basically the treatment. Okay, and then we ask them, okay, based on this information, if your spouse were to claim benefits at age 67, what do you think their benefits would be? Yes.
So we'll start from this correlation of the errors. So
yeah.
Would you have anything in the survey to indicate whether this is an unusual year that you both be aware of, like someone's unemployed, or they got a bonus, or some won the lottery?
So
that would generate positive correlation because
yes.
It's not necessarily certain.
What we can do is, if people are self-employed versus salaried individuals, so salaried workers typically have less volatility in their income. So I think we can do some things on this. Let me write this down. But the answer is we haven't yet done that. But that's a good point. Yeah, that would give a positive correlation, yeah. Okay, so let me move on. Okay. I'm only going to show you two things today. The first thing is just to show you that there is a first stage, right? Whether when I give this information to the index spouse, whether the first spouse actually responds to this information or not. That part is not very novel because we know from there are many papers which show that typically these kinds of interventions work. The part that's going to be, that I'm going to spend more time on is going to be the spillovers part, okay? And I'm not going to get to the third part. Okay, so I've already defined what perception gap is. The perception gap is going to be what the calculator says the benefit is. and what they themselves report as their benefit. And I'm basically, let me just jump to the figure. What we're doing here is, this is showing for my own benefits, when I give information to people, we're comparing the treatment group. I'm only looking at the index spouses here, right? This is looking at whether there is a first stage or not. When I look at the index spouses, the group that got information versus the control individuals who didn't get any information, what this is saying is, because remember, we have a within an individual, we give information in 2 stages. When I give you information about your own benefits, this is showing the treatment effect on my own perception gap that declines by about 22 percentage points. Okay, so the error is declining by about 22 percentage points. When I give them information about their spouse's benefits, they don't revise much about their own benefits because I already gave them that information, right? So what I'm showing you here on the right-hand side is, when I tell you what your benefits are, you actually update about your spouse's benefits also. Okay, you learn something about the formula, presumably. So those errors reduced by about 10 percentage points. But then when I tell you about exactly what your spouse's benefits are going to be, the error further reduces. Okay, so this is just telling you that the treatment is doing what it is supposed to be doing. People move in the direction of the information. Okay. Yes.
What share of the gap is that resolving? Like, is that removing the gap entirely?
No, it doesn't remove the gap entirely. It's about 20% of the gap. Yeah, it doesn't. And there are many reasons that you might think, but it does not close. It's about, I would say, between 30 and 50% of the gap is closed. Yeah. Okay. And this is just saying, I have to close by 12:50, is that right? Okay.
I mean, you can go to that. I have a question from the Zoom though.
Yeah.
So Barbara asked, you said there were no differences by gender, but the reference literature showed much more spillover husbands to wives than wives to husbands.
Yes.
Did not find this.
Yeah, we didn't find that. And the reference literature is all from developing countries. I think that's one big difference. We went in not having any strong priors about whether things were going to differ by gender, but my immediate answer is, there are only 2 studies that I know of, and one is from a developing country. The other one is asking people about the rank in the income distribution. I don't have it. They do find evidence of a gender difference there, but yeah.
The follow-up comment is that Germany found this, but I can connect you and Barbara.
Yeah, sure.
Find about it.
Yeah, Germany did find this. Like one of the references was in Germany, the second one. Okay. So now the part that I want to focus on is whether there are spillovers. And just to be very clear, what I'm doing here is I'm going to be comparing this group here, when people are reporting, secondary spouses are reporting their expectations at the baseline. I'm comparing this group with this group here, okay? Because this group, their partners received information. This group their partners did not receive any social security related information. That's all we're doing here. And in the absence of spillovers related to social security benefits, these 2 distributions should be quite similar, right? But if they're not, then that's going to be consistent with this idea that, okay, there was some information that was shared. Okay. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is in the control group, this is just looking at index spouses benefits. In the control group, the errors are basically about 55 percentage points, okay, in the control group at the baseline. This is the secondary spouse, right? The secondary spouse whose first partner did not get any information, their errors are about 55 percentage points. In the treatment, when I say treatment group, they haven't yet been given any information. Their partners were given information. Their errors are about 45 percentage points, okay? So there's a gap of about, these individuals are in relative terms more accurate than these individuals because the information is randomized, right? So if people were not sharing information, this should have been very similar for the 2 groups, yes.
Did you look at heterogeneity in this context across like people who were overestimating versus underestimating?
Yeah, I'm going to get to all the heterogeneity. Yeah, just give me a, okay, so this is just showing you the data. And now I'm going to start showing you a bunch of regressions for the next 5 minutes or so. So what this is saying is in the treatment group, when I say treatment group, these are the secondary spouses whose index spouse was treated. Okay, just to be very clear what this is. Their errors are smaller by about 4.5 percentage points. Okay? In terms of, what does this mean in terms of how much of the treatment effect of the first spouse is being transferred over to the second spouse? About half of it is being transferred. Okay, so this is a pretty large spillover when you think about it, like, because there's already measurement error here already. A lot of other things are also happening. So there's, and similarly for spousal benefits, you might think, and I'm not going to show you that here, is part of this would depend on, how big the first stage was for the first spouse, right? So even if you control for that, you get pretty similar numbers. So you are finding sizable spillovers here. So what I'm going to do next, in the next few minutes, is trying to understand what are the determinants of these spillovers. Like, in what cases do you see more or less information? And I'm going to divide these factors in terms of information-based factors. So you might think, okay, if the index spouse found the information more credible, they should be more likely to share that information with their partner. So I'm going to show you some cuts along those lines. I'm going to show you some cuts by characteristics of the couple. Like gender has already come up. You can also think about respective roles of the spouse, quality of the relationship, and then I'll talk a little bit about strategic motivations where you might want to hide information from your partner, or you want to share it for some reason. Okay, so I'm going to start going through this pretty quickly, and I'm only going to start talk about index spouse benefits. Here I'm cutting the data by whether the index spouse found the information. So what we did in the survey was when the index spouse was given information, we asked them, how credible do you find this information? Okay. So individuals, index spouses who are saying, oh, they really found this information quite credible, quite useful, these are those couples. Okay. And these are those couples, when they say no, it's not that they just didn't find it that credible, right? So no one is saying this information is not useful at all, just cutting the data in relative terms here. You're seeing, as you would expect, it's really these couples where the information spillovers are happening. Okay, so which is I think reassuring, is telling you something about the information that we gave and not something else that's going on. Here we cut the data by how far away individuals are from retirement. Okay, so our hypothesis, that's actually hypothesis was, people are relatively close to retirement. They presumably have been talking about this, right? In couples where they're like, farther away from retirement, arguably that's where there's more action that's happening. They also tend to have bigger errors, right? Because if you look at the size of the spillovers, they're actually quite similar. But because they tend to have bigger errors, you see larger revisions in those couples, okay? Which is again consistent with this in an information-based story, okay? Now I'm going to move to couple-based factors. So here we're cutting the data by gender. You can come up with a story if you want to, based looking at this, but nothing really jumps out. It's not that, like, only when the first spouse is a male, only information gets transferred in that case. You're seeing spillovers in both cases, okay? And this is a question that was on Zoom, that this is, the few papers that are out there, they seem to suggest that spillovers are much larger when the index spouse is male. We don't find evidence of that here, okay? So the other thing that we did here was, you might think that if more information should spill over, you could come up with stories either way. So let me tell you what is happening here. These are couples where both spouses agree that the first spouse is financially more savvy, okay? And you could think of stories where it could have gone either way. At least in terms of magnitude, you're seeing much larger spillovers when the both spouses agree that the first spouse is more savvy, okay? Here, there's in the survey, we asked a question of who makes decisions in the household, okay? So these are couples where the index spouse is the one who's making decisions in the household. And again, ex ante, theoretically, it could have gone either way, right? If the index spouse is making decisions in the household, then presumably they don't need to share the information with the second spouse, right? But what you are finding here is that you see a lot more transfer of information when the first spouse is the one who's making decisions in the household. Okay, as I said, theoretically, you could have gone ex ante. You could have predicted a result that goes in either direction. Okay, this is cutting the data by disagreement in this marital satisfaction measure. Okay, so this is what below median here means is that these couples are more agreeable in terms of the marital satisfaction, which for us is a proxy of, okay, these are couples which are less dysfunctional. Okay, so in these couples is exactly in those couples where you're seeing much larger spillovers. Okay, and that is for us is at least consistent with this idea that, okay, at least part of what is happening here is some kind of communication friction. I should say that we actually, when you cut the data by the level of satisfaction in the relationship, that doesn't really seem to predict spillovers that much. It really seems to be, it's not like, so it seems to be happy couples and unhappy couples are sharing information at similar rates. It's really where they disagree, the two partners, that you see differential rates of spillovers. Okay, so this is at least this is what we had in mind for strategic motivations, and you could come up with other stories, and I would like to hear that, is you could think about, let's say if you are a couple, you're an individual where you think that there's a very high likelihood of separation from your partner at some point, right? So then you might not want to share certain kinds of information. So what we do here is we're cutting the data, and I think this was a question that was asked earlier, is like people who are positively surprised versus negatively surprised. So negative news here is you are told that your benefits are actually much lower than what you had thought, and positive news means that you're told that, oh, your benefits are actually much higher than you would have thought. And what you see here is you see much larger spillovers when you receive negative news, okay? Not only for your own self, but also for your spouse. So if you could write down stories of like, strategic motivations where you might want to hide positive information about yourself from your partner, especially if you're at a couple which is at a high risk of separation, or you want to hide positive information about your spouse in such couples. We don't find any evidence of that. So the fact that you tend to are much more likely to share negative news, both about yourself as well as your partner, is consistent with like a pretty rational, a collective, a cooperative model of decision making. Because think about it, the mistakes that are going to be particularly costly are the ones, if you don't re-optimize when you're getting negative news, that's the kinds of mistakes which are going to be particularly costly. Okay, so this is very much consistent with that. Okay, and I'd be happy to hear more about like other kinds of strategic motivations. But we've like tortured the data quite a bit, trying to see if anything comes out based on different kinds of interactions, and there just there doesn't seem to be much going on there. Okay, I'm not going to spend time on summarizing this. I didn't talk much today about what happens in terms of claiming age expectations and retirement expectations. But I can tell you, as a result of giving information to one partner, they become much more aligned. But you still get more bite if you also give that information to the second partner. So what that means is, from policy perspective, it's just not enough to give information only to one partner. I'm not going to repeat myself again. I think one of the policy implications, so what are the implications here, right? So I think one is like how we think about decision making within households. And I think the result overall are consistent with these models of cooperative models of household decision making, where there are frictions that are present. Okay, and in terms of policy design, of course, Social Security Administration cannot be sending you information to you about benefits of your spouses. But right now, the way they send out these notifications depends on your birth date, right? So there's no attempt to coordinate the dissemination of information to couples within the household. Our results suggest that you might want to do something about that. Okay, so I'll stop there. I'm sorry I went over.
A few more minutes for questions if those have them. I'll let you go to the front of the room if you prefer that. All right. Fantastic. Thanks for the great turnout after break. Thank you all again.